Sarah Martinez had always been different from other kids in her small Texas town. Born with a rare bone condition that affected her left leg, she learned to walk with a cane by the age of 8. The sleek black walking stick became as much a part of her as her determined brown eyes and stubborn smile. While other children ran around the playground, Sarah found her strength in books, strategy games, and an unusual fascination with military history. Her father, a retired Army veteran, never treated her like she was fragile. Instead of sympathy, he gave her discipline. Every morning before school, he would wake her at dawn for what he called adaptation training. This wasn't physical therapy. It was learning to move efficiently, to use her cane not as a crutch but as an extension of her body. He taught her balance, timing, and most importantly, how to turn what others saw as a weakness into an unexpected advantage. The other kids at Roosevelt High School weren't cruel exactly, but they weren't kind either. They whispered when she walked down the hallways, the soft tap-tap-tap of her cane marking her presence before she even appeared. During PE class, she was always assigned to keep score or manage equipment while her classmates played sports. The teachers meant well, but their protective instincts only reinforced what everyone already believed, that Sarah was someone who needed to be looked after, not someone who could look after others. But Sarah had dreams that extended far beyond the low expectations of her small town. Every night she would lie in bed reading about military strategists, famous battles, and the brave men and women who had served their country. Her bedroom walls were covered with maps, timelines of major conflicts, and biographies of generals who had overcome impossible odds. Her father would sometimes find her asleep with a book about Sun Tzu, or Patton still open in her hands. When Sarah announced during her senior year that she planned to enlist in the Army after graduation, the reaction was immediate and unanimous. Her guidance counselor suggested community college. Her mother cried. Her classmates exchanged knowing looks that said what they were all thinking. The girl with the cane wanted to be a soldier. Even her best friend Emma tried to gently redirect her toward more realistic career options like teaching or accounting. The most painful reaction came from her longtime crush, Marcus, who had always been kind to her in a distant, polite way. When she mentioned her military plans during lunch one day, he laughed. Not meanly, but with the kind of dismissive chuckle reserved for impossible things. "Come on, Sarah," he said, gesturing toward her cane. "Be serious. You can barely walk across the cafeteria without that thing. How are you going to march with a full pack?" That night, Sarah sat in her room staring at the Army recruitment brochures she had hidden in her desk drawer for months. The glossy photos showed strong, capable soldiers running through obstacle courses, carrying heavy equipment, protecting their fellow Americans. None of them looked like her. None of them needed a cane to walk. For the first time since childhood, she allowed herself to wonder if everyone else was right. Her father found her there an hour later, tears streaming down her face as she held a crumpled recruitment flyer. He didn't ask what was wrong. He could see the defeat in her shoulders, the way she had folded in on herself. Instead, he sat down on her bed and waited. When she finally told him about Marcus's comment and all the other small discouragements that had been building up for months, he listened without interrupting. "You know what I learned in my 20 years of service?" he said finally. "The strongest soldiers aren't the ones who never face obstacles. They're the ones who face obstacles every single day and keep moving forward anyway. You've been training for this your whole life, Sarah. You just didn't know it yet." The next morning, Sarah walked into the Army recruitment office in the next town over. Staff Sergeant Williams, a decorated veteran with kind eyes and calloused hands, looked up from his paperwork as she approached his desk. She could see him notice the cane, see the subtle shift in his expression as he prepared to deliver what she assumed would be another gentle rejection. Instead, she placed the recruitment brochure on his desk and looked him straight in the eye. "I want to serve my country," she said, her voice steady and clear. "And before you tell me why I can't, I'd like you to tell me exactly what I need to do to prove that I can." Staff Sergeant Williams studied her for a long moment, taking in her determined posture, the way she held her cane like a staff of office rather than a medical device. He had seen thousands of potential recruits over the years. Cocky high school athletes who thought military service would be easy. Scared kids running away from bad situations. Idealistic young adults who had no idea what they were signing up for. But he had never seen someone quite like Sarah Martinez. "All right," he said, pulling out a thick packet of forms. "Let's start with the paperwork." The Medical Examination and Evaluation Board, MEB, at Fort Sam Houston was not a place where dreams came to flourish. It was a sterile, fluorescent-lit facility where military doctors determined who was physically capable of serving and who wasn't. Sarah had spent 3 months preparing for this moment, training harder than she ever had in her life. But as she sat in the waiting room surrounded by nervous recruits, she felt the familiar weight of doubt settling on her shoulders. Dr. Patricia Chen, a no-nonsense Army physician with silver-streaked hair, called Sarah's name. The examination was thorough and clinical. X-rays, flexibility tests, balance assessments, and endless questions about her medical history. Dr. Chen examined Sarah's leg, tested her range of motion, and observed her walking both with and without her cane. The doctor's expression remained neutral throughout, giving nothing away. "Miss Martinez," Dr. Chen said finally, setting down her clipboard, "I'm going to be direct with you. Your condition presents significant challenges for standard military service. However, your compensation techniques are remarkable, and your overall fitness level exceeds many candidates without physical limitations." She paused, seeming to weigh her words carefully. "I'm recommending you for a specialized assessment program. It's unusual, but not unprecedented." The specialized assessment was unlike anything Sarah had imagined. Instead of the basic training she had read about in books, she was assigned to a small group of recruits who, for various reasons, didn't fit the standard military mold. There was Rodriguez, a former gang member from Los Angeles with a juvenile record. Kim, a brilliant computer programmer who suffered from severe social anxiety. Jackson, a farm boy from Alabama who had never seen a city larger than Birmingham, but could track a deer through woods that looked identical to everyone else. Their drill instructor was Staff Sergeant Rebecca Torres, a compact woman with scars on her hands and a reputation for turning unlikely candidates into exceptional soldiers. Torres had lost 2 fingers on her left hand during a deployment in Afghanistan, and she understood something about adaptation that most instructors didn't. She looked at Sarah's group not as damaged goods or charity cases, but as soldiers with untapped potential. The first week was brutal. While Sarah had trained extensively with her father, military conditioning was on an entirely different level. The other recruits in her specialized group struggled with their own challenges, but they could all run without assistance. Sarah had to find different ways to complete the same tasks, often taking longer and working twice as hard to achieve the same results. During one particularly grueling obstacle course session, she fell behind the group while navigating a series of mud-covered barriers. Her cane kept getting stuck in the thick clay, and by the time she reached the finish line, the others had been waiting for nearly 10 minutes. She could see the mixture of pity and impatience in their eyes, the same look she had gotten used to in high school. That evening, as Sarah sat alone in the barracks cleaning mud from her cane, Torres approached her. "Martinez," she said, sitting down on the bunk across from her. "What do you think is your biggest weakness as a soldier?" Sarah gestured toward her leg. "I think that's pretty obvious, Sergeant." Torres shook her head. "Wrong answer. Your biggest weakness is that you're still trying to be the same kind of soldier as everyone else. You're not, and that's not a bad thing." She stood up and walked toward the door, then turned back. "Tomorrow we're going to start training you differently. Not because you can't do what they do, but because you can do things they can't." The next phase of Sarah's training was unlike anything in the standard military handbook. Torres worked with her individually, teaching her techniques that played to her strengths rather than highlighting her limitations. They practiced using her cane as a tool for leverage, balance, and even as a weapon in close-quarters combat. Sarah learned to move silently despite her aid, to use her different gait as an advantage in certain terrains, and to read ground conditions better than soldiers who took their footing for granted. More importantly, Torres began incorporating Sarah into leadership exercises. Her years of adaptation had given her an unusual ability to assess situations quickly and find alternative solutions when standard approaches failed. During wargame simulations, Sarah consistently identified strategic opportunities that other recruits missed. She could spot weak points in defenses, anticipate enemy movements, and coordinate complex maneuvers with a clarity that impressed even veteran officers. The other recruits in her group began to see her differently. Rodriguez, who had initially made jokes about her cane, started asking for her tactical advice during exercises. Kim found Sarah easier to talk to than the more aggressive recruits, and their friendship helped both of them overcome their respective social challenges. Jackson, despite his rural background, recognized Sarah's natural leadership abilities and became one of her strongest supporters. But respect within her small group was one thing. Proving herself to the broader military community would require something more dramatic. That opportunity came during the final evaluation exercise, a complex multi-day simulation that would determine whether Sarah and her fellow specialized recruits would be accepted into the regular army or discharged from the program. The exercise was designed to test everything they had learned: physical endurance, tactical thinking, leadership under pressure, and the ability to function as part of a larger unit. Sarah's group would be integrated with a company of standard recruits, including several who had already completed basic training and were preparing for advanced specialized schools. As they prepared for the simulation, Sarah overheard conversations among the regular recruits. They spoke about her group as the special cases and charity projects. One particularly vocal recruit, a muscular young man named Thompson, made it clear that he viewed Sarah as a liability who would endanger the entire unit. "I didn't sign up to babysit," he said loudly enough for her to hear. "When things get real, she's going to get someone killed." Sarah felt the familiar sting of rejection, but this time it was accompanied by something else, a cold, determined anger that reminded her of her father's expression when he talked about protecting his fellow soldiers. She had spent her entire life proving she could keep up. Now it was time to prove she could lead. The war game simulation took place in the rugged terrain of Fort Hood's training grounds, an area designed to replicate the challenging environments where American soldiers might find themselves deployed. Sarah's combined unit of 60 recruits was divided into 3 squads, each tasked with securing different objectives while defending against an opposing force of experienced soldiers playing the role of enemy combatants. Sarah was assigned to Alpha Squad under the command of a regular recruit named Peterson, a former college football player who had sailed through basic training with ease. Thompson, the recruit who had questioned her presence, was appointed as Peterson's second-in-command. The rest of Alpha Squad consisted of soldiers who clearly viewed Sarah as an unwelcome addition to their team. They weren't openly hostile, but their body language spoke volumes. They positioned themselves away from her during briefings, avoided making eye contact, and spoke around her rather than to her. The first day of the exercise went poorly for Alpha Squad. Their objective was to establish a defensive position on a hill overlooking a strategic valley, but Peterson's aggressive approach led them into 2 ambushes. During the second ambush, Sarah noticed enemy movement that the others had missed and tried to warn Peterson, but he dismissed her observations as nervous chatter from someone who wasn't used to combat situations. The squad lost half their number to simulated casualties and failed to achieve their primary objective. That evening, as the recruits gathered around small fires to eat their rations and plan for the next day, Sarah found herself sitting alone while the others clustered in their own groups. She could hear Thompson's voice carrying across the camp as he loudly blamed their failures on dead weight and political correctness run amok. His words stung, but what hurt more was the silence from the other squad members who didn't disagree with him. Rodriguez from her original group found her there an hour later, staring into the flames with an expression he had never seen before. "You okay, Martinez?" he asked, settling down beside her. They had become close friends during their specialized training, and he could read her moods better than most. "I'm tired of proving myself over and over again," she said quietly. "No matter what I do, no matter how hard I work, there's always going to be someone like Thompson who sees the cane before they see the soldier." Rodriguez nodded, understanding the frustration. "You know what Torres told me last week? She said the best leaders aren't the ones who never face adversity. They're the ones who face it every day and figure out how to turn it into strength." He stood up and brushed dust off his uniform. "Tomorrow's a new day, Sarah. Show them what Torres taught you." The second day brought a dramatic shift in the exercise dynamics. During the morning briefing, the instructors announced that Peterson had been wounded and removed from the simulation. According to the scenario, Alpha Squad needed to elect a new leader to complete their remaining objectives. The choice seemed obvious to most of the squad. Thompson was Peterson's second-in-command, had natural leadership presence, and possessed the kind of aggressive confidence that many associated with military leadership. But when the vote was taken, something unexpected happened. Rodriguez voted for Sarah. So did Kim and Jackson from her original specialized group. Then, to everyone's surprise, Private Williams, a quiet recruit from Arizona, who had barely spoken during the previous day, also voted for Sarah. 3 more hands went up. Soldiers who had observed Sarah's tactical awareness during the failed missions and recognized something that Thompson's bombast couldn't. Match Thompson was furious. "This is insane," he said, his voice rising. "You're going to put someone who can barely walk in charge of a combat mission? She's going to get us all killed." Several squad members nodded in agreement, but the vote had been clear. Sarah was now the leader of Alpha Squad. Her first decision surprised everyone, including herself. Instead of trying to prove she could be as aggressive as Thompson, Sarah gathered the squad together and admitted what everyone already knew. "I'm not the fastest runner here," she said, looking each soldier in the eye. "I'm not the strongest, and I definitely don't look like what you think a squad leader should look like. But I've been watching our enemies for the past day and a half, and I've noticed things that faster. Stronger leaders missed." She pulled out a hand-drawn map she had been working on during her sleepless night. "The opposing force has been using the same 3 routes to set up their ambushes. They're predictable because they assume we're predictable. But what if we're not?" Sarah outlined a plan that was both simple and brilliant. Instead of charging toward their objective like every other squad, they would use a longer, more difficult route that would put them behind enemy lines. Thompson shook his head dismissively. "That route goes through Devil's Canyon. It's too dangerous, especially for—" He gestured toward Sarah's cane. "We'll never make it in time." "You're right that it's dangerous," Sarah acknowledged. "And you're right that it will be especially challenging for me. That's exactly why they won't expect it." She looked around the circle of faces, seeing doubt but also curiosity. "I'm not asking you to follow me because you feel sorry for me. I'm asking you to follow me because I have a plan that will work." The next few hours would test everything Sarah had learned about leadership, strategy, and her own limitations. Devil's Canyon was a treacherous route even for fully able-bodied soldiers. Narrow paths along steep cliffs, loose rock that could trigger falls, and terrain that required careful balance and sure footing. For someone who relied on a cane, it seemed like an impossible challenge. But Sarah had studied the topographical maps more carefully than anyone else, and she had noticed something important. While the canyon was dangerous, it also provided natural cover and multiple fallback positions. More crucially, it led to a position where Alpha Squad could observe all 3 enemy ambush points while remaining completely hidden themselves. As they began their trek through Devil's Canyon, Sarah's different way of moving actually became an advantage. Her cane helped her test the stability of loose rocks before putting her full weight on them. Her slower, more deliberate pace forced the entire squad to move more carefully, avoiding the kind of noise that had given away their position during previous missions. Thompson, despite his objections to the plan, found himself grudgingly impressed by Sarah's methodical approach to the dangerous terrain. 3 hours into their journey through Devil's Canyon, Alpha Squad reached the observation point Sarah had identified on her maps. The position was everything she had promised. They could see the entire valley below, including all 3 routes the enemy had been using for ambushes. More importantly, they were completely invisible from below, hidden by rock formations and natural camouflage. But Sarah's tactical brilliance was only part of what impressed the squad. During the difficult climb, she had consistently put herself in the most dangerous positions, testing unstable rocks and narrow ledges before allowing others to follow. When Private Martinez from California had nearly fallen during a particularly treacherous passage, Sarah had used her cane to provide additional support, helping him regain his balance. Her supposed weakness had become a tool for protecting her squad. Thompson, who had been vocal in his criticism, found himself working closely with Sarah to coordinate the squad's movements. Despite his initial resistance, he began to see what the voters had recognized: Sarah's calm, analytical mind and natural ability to anticipate problems before they became crises. When she asked for his opinion on positioning their defensive perimeter, he realized she wasn't trying to prove herself superior to him. She was trying to use everyone's strengths, including his natural aggressiveness, in the most effective way possible. From their hidden position, Sarah observed the enemy forces for 2 hours, taking detailed notes about their patterns, timing, and communication methods. She noticed something that changed everything. The opposing force was preparing for a major assault on Bravo and Charlie squads, who were still following predictable routes through the main valley. If Sarah's squad remained in their observation post, they could watch their fellow recruits get systematically defeated. But if they acted on the intelligence they had gathered, they could turn the entire simulation around. "We have a choice," Sarah told her squad, spreading out her updated maps and sketches. "We can stay here and complete our original objective safely, or we can use what we've learned to help the other squads and potentially win this whole exercise." She looked at Thompson. "It's going to require the kind of aggressive assault that I'm not physically capable of leading. I need someone who can move fast and hit hard." Thompson stared at her for a moment, understanding what she was offering. Despite being the official squad leader, she was asking him to lead the actual assault while she coordinated from the high ground. It was a level of tactical humility and strategic thinking that impressed him more than any display of physical prowess could have. "What do you need me to do?" he asked. Sarah's plan was complex but elegant. Using their hidden position, Alpha Squad would provide intelligence and covering fire while Thompson led a small assault team to disrupt the enemy's planned ambush. Meanwhile, Sarah would coordinate with Bravo and Charlie squads via radio, guiding them away from the traps that had been set and toward positions where they could be most effective. The plan required perfect timing and trust. Thompson had to believe that Sarah's intelligence was accurate, and that her coordination would keep his assault team from being overwhelmed. The other squads had to trust tactical advice from someone they had never worked with before, and Sarah had to trust that she could manage multiple moving pieces of a complex operation while dealing with the physical demands of her position. When the action began, it unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance. Sarah's voice came across the radio calm and clear, directing Bravo Squad away from a prepared ambush and toward a flanking position that would trap the enemy between two forces. She guided Charlie Squad to a defensive position that blocked the enemy's primary escape route. Meanwhile, Thompson's assault team struck at exactly the right moment, hitting the enemy's command post just as they were preparing to spring their trap. The opposing force, made up of experienced soldiers and instructors, found themselves completely outmaneuvered by a group of recruits they had expected to defeat easily. Sarah's intelligence had been perfect, Thompson's assault had been precisely timed, and the coordination between all three squads had been flawless. Within 30 minutes, the enemy force was forced to surrender, marking the first time in the exercise's history that the recruit side had achieved such a decisive victory. But the real test came during the debriefing session that evening. The exercise instructors, including some senior officers who had observed the day's action, gathered all the recruits to analyze what had happened. Colonel Martinez, the senior officer overseeing the exercise, stood before the group with Sarah's tactical maps and communication logs spread out on a table. "Today we witnessed something unusual," Colonel Martinez began, "not just because the recruit force achieved an unprecedented victory, but because of how that victory was achieved." He picked up Sarah's hand-drawn maps, pointing to the detailed notations and tactical observations. "This level of battlefield intelligence and strategic thinking is exceptional for experienced soldiers, let alone recruits." He looked directly at Sarah. "Recruit Martinez, stand up." As Sarah rose, using her cane for support, the colonel continued, "Your tactical analysis identified enemy patterns that our observer teams had missed. Your route selection turned a physical disadvantage into a strategic advantage, and your coordination of multiple units during combat showed exceptional leadership under pressure." Thompson found himself standing as well. "Sir, if I may," he said, surprising everyone, including himself. "Recruit Martinez didn't just plan a successful mission. She made me a better soldier. She used my strengths while covering for my weaknesses, and she did it in a way that made me want to follow her lead." The colonel nodded approvingly. "That, Recruit Thompson, is the definition of leadership." He turned back to address the entire group. "Today's exercise demonstrates something important about military service. The best soldiers aren't necessarily the fastest runners or the strongest fighters. They're the ones who can think clearly under pressure, adapt to challenging circumstances, and inspire others to achieve more than they thought possible." As the debriefing concluded, Sarah found herself surrounded by recruits who had barely acknowledged her existence just days before. They wanted to understand her tactical thinking, to learn from her approach to problem solving, and to express their respect for what she had accomplished. For the first time since arriving at basic training, Sarah felt like she truly belonged. But the real validation came from an unexpected source. As the recruits dispersed to their barracks, Drill Sergeant Torres approached Sarah with a slight smile on her usually stern face. "Not bad for a charity case," she said, echoing Thompson's earlier words with obvious irony. "But this was just a training exercise, Martinez. Are you ready for the real thing?" 6 months after completing advanced training, Sergeant Sarah Martinez found herself deployed to Forward Operating Base Phoenix, in a classified location where international tensions had been escalating for weeks. The base housed a mixed unit of American soldiers working alongside military personnel from allied nations, as part of a peacekeeping mission that everyone knew could turn into active combat at any moment. Sarah had been assigned to the intelligence and reconnaissance team, a role that perfectly matched her analytical skills and attention to detail. Her commanding officer, Captain James Morrison, was a veteran with 2 previous deployments who had specifically requested her for his team after reading her training evaluations. However, not everyone at FOB Phoenix was impressed by Sarah's credentials or comfortable with her presence. The base's senior enlisted advisor was Master Sergeant Frank Kowalski, a 20-year veteran with multiple combat decorations and a reputation for breaking recruits who couldn't meet his impossibly high standards. Kowalski was old-school military in every sense. He believed that physical limitations had no place in combat zones, and he made his opinions known loudly and frequently. From Sarah's first day at the base, he made it clear that he viewed her as a liability who had been placed on his base due to political correctness rather than military necessity. "I don't care what your training scores were," Kowalski told Sarah during her first briefing. "This isn't a classroom exercise. When the shooting starts, soldiers die because someone couldn't keep up. I won't have that blood on my hands because some general wanted to make a point about inclusion." His words were harsh, but Sarah could see something else in his eyes, genuine concern for the soldiers under his command and fear that her presence might endanger them. Sarah's first weeks at FOB Phoenix were challenging in ways that training hadn't prepared her for. The base was constantly on high alert, with intelligence reports suggesting that hostile forces were planning an attack on their position. Every soldier had to be ready for combat at any moment, and the physical demands of base security operations tested Sarah's abilities in new ways. She struggled with the long patrols, the heavy equipment, and the unforgiving terrain around the base. But Sarah also began to prove her value in ways that surprised even her supporters. Her analytical skills helped the intelligence team identify patterns in enemy communications that had previously gone unnoticed. Her careful attention to detail during reconnaissance missions provided crucial information about enemy positions and movements. Most importantly, her different perspective often revealed tactical opportunities that more conventional military thinking missed. The breakthrough came during a routine patrol that turned into anything but routine. Sarah was accompanying a squad led by Staff Sergeant Jennifer Walsh, an experienced combat veteran who had initially been skeptical of Sarah's capabilities, but had grown to respect her analytical contributions. The patrol's mission was to investigate reports of unusual activity in a nearby village that served as a crucial supply route for the base. As they approached the village, Sarah noticed something that bothered her. The normal sounds of daily life were absent. No children playing, no merchants calling out their wares, no domestic animals making noise. Through her binoculars, she could see that the village appeared occupied, but something felt wrong. When she shared her concerns with Walsh, the staff sergeant trusted Sarah's instincts enough to halt the patrol and call for backup. Sarah's caution proved justified when reconnaissance drones revealed that the village had been evacuated and occupied by hostile forces, who were preparing an ambush. The patrol would have walked directly into a trap that could have resulted in multiple casualties. Instead, they were able to withdraw safely and call in precise airstrikes that eliminated the enemy position without endangering any civilians. The successful mission earned Sarah respect from many soldiers who had previously doubted her capabilities, but it also increased Kowalski's hostility. He seemed to view her success as a personal challenge to his authority and a threat to the traditional military culture he had devoted his life to defending. The tension between them came to a head during a base-wide training exercise that Kowalski had designed to test every soldier's combat readiness. The exercise was brutal by design, a series of physical and tactical challenges that pushed soldiers to their absolute limits. Kowalski had personally overseen the course design, creating obstacles that he knew would be particularly difficult for Sarah. There were long sprints over rough terrain, heavy equipment carries, and close-quarters combat scenarios that required quick movement and perfect balance. Sarah struggled through the early portions of the exercise, falling behind the other soldiers and becoming increasingly frustrated with her performance. She could hear Kowalski's voice over the radio, making pointed comments about soldiers who couldn't keep up and the dangers of lowered standards. By the time she reached the final challenge, a complex urban warfare simulation, she was exhausted, angry, and ready to prove herself once and for all. The final scenario placed Sarah in a simulated building where she had to locate and neutralize multiple targets while avoiding civilian casualties. The environment was designed to be disorienting. Smoke machines created limited visibility, loudspeakers played recordings of gunfire and explosions, and the layout included narrow corridors and steep staircases that would challenge anyone's mobility. But as Sarah moved through the simulation, something clicked. All the years of adaptation, all the specialized training with Torres, all the tactical lessons learned during her deployment, everything came together. She moved through the building methodically, using her cane to test for hidden obstacles and to maintain balance in the confusing environment. Her slower pace actually became an advantage, allowing her to notice details that faster-moving soldiers might miss when she encountered the final target, a pop-up figure representing an enemy combatant, who was using a civilian as a human shield. Sarah's solution was both brilliant and unexpected. Instead of attempting the standard approach, which would have been nearly impossible given her physical limitations, she used her cane to trigger a distraction, while positioning herself for a shot that neutralized the threat without endangering the civilian. Kowalski was waiting for her at the exit, timer in hand and skepticism written across his face. But when he saw her final score, not just passing but among the top performances of the day, his expression changed. "How?" he asked, genuine confusion replacing his usual hostility. "Different doesn't mean inferior, Master Sergeant," Sarah replied, breathing heavily, but standing tall. "It just means different." The attack on Forward Operating Base Phoenix came without warning, at 0347 hours on a Tuesday morning in late September. Sarah was pulling her shift in the intelligence center when the first mortars began falling, sending shockwaves through the base that rattled equipment and shattered windows. The base alarm system screamed to life as soldiers scrambled from their sleeping quarters, grabbing weapons and running toward their assigned defensive positions. Sarah's training kicked in immediately. Despite the chaos around her, she methodically secured the intelligence equipment and gathered the critical communication codes before making her way toward the command bunker. The base was under coordinated attack from multiple directions, with enemy forces using the pre-dawn darkness and knowledge of the terrain to maximum advantage. Captain Morrison was already in the command bunker when Sarah arrived, coordinating defensive responses with the various squad leaders positioned around the base perimeter. The situation reports coming in over the radio painted a grim picture. The enemy had superior numbers, knew the base layout better than expected, and had positioned snipers in locations that made movement between defensive positions extremely dangerous. "Martinez," Morrison called out when he saw her. "I need you on intelligence analysis. The enemy knew exactly where to hit us and when. This wasn't a random attack." Sarah immediately began working with the communication intercepts and reconnaissance data, looking for patterns that might explain how the enemy had obtained such detailed information about the base. Meanwhile, Master Sergeant Kowalski was coordinating the defensive response from a bunker on the eastern perimeter, where the enemy assault was most concentrated. Radio communications revealed that his position was taking heavy fire and running low on ammunition. Several soldiers had been wounded, and the enemy was preparing for a final assault that could overrun the entire eastern defensive line. The breakthrough in Sarah's analysis came when she cross-referenced recent patrol reports with communication intercepts. She realized that the enemy had been systematically gathering intelligence for weeks, using the village where her patrol had nearly been ambushed as a base for surveillance operations. More critically, she identified the enemy's command frequency and discovered that they were coordinating their assault using a predictable pattern of tactical communications. "Captain," Sarah called out, pointing to her analysis on the tactical display. "I found their command structure. They're using a centralized communication system with backup frequencies that follow a specific sequence. If we can disrupt their primary frequency at the right moment, we can break their coordination during the final assault. Morrison studied her findings quickly. Can you jam their communications? Not from here, Sarah replied. The jamming equipment is in the eastern bunker with Master Sergeant Kowalski. Someone needs to get there and coordinate the jamming with their assault timing. The problem was obvious to everyone in the command bunker. The route to the eastern perimeter was completely exposed to enemy sniper fire. 3 soldiers had already been wounded trying to make that crossing, and the enemy had positioned their shooters specifically to prevent reinforcements from reaching Kowalski's position. It was a death trap for anyone who attempted the journey. I'll go, said Staff Sergeant Walsh, checking her equipment. I can make it, Sarah shook her head. They're expecting someone to try that route. They've been watching our movement patterns all night. She looked at the tactical map, studying the terrain between the command bunker and the eastern perimeter. But they're not expecting me, Morrison frowned. Martinez, that's not your job. You're intelligence, not assault. Exactly, Sarah replied, already gathering the jamming equipment codes and frequency information. They've been studying our soldiers for weeks. They know how fast we move, what routes we take, how we respond to sniper fire. But they don't know how I move. The plan Sarah proposed was both audacious and logical. Instead of trying to sprint across the exposed ground like previous attempts, she would use her different gait and her cane to convince the enemy snipers that she was a wounded soldier who posed no immediate threat. Her slower, irregular movement pattern would be unlike anything they had prepared for, potentially allowing her to reach the eastern bunker, while their attention was focused on more obvious threats. Captain Morrison was reluctant to approve such a risky mission, but the situation was becoming desperate. Radio reports indicated that Kowalski's position was about to be overrun, and without communication jamming, the enemy's final assault would likely succeed. If you're going to do this, Morrison said finally, you go now, before they start their final push. Sarah made her way to the exit point, checking her equipment one final time. She carried the jamming codes, a radio, and her service weapon, but more importantly, she carried years of experience in moving differently than everyone expected. As she prepared to leave the bunker, Morrison handed her an additional piece of equipment, a small explosive device that could be used to destroy the jamming equipment if she was captured. The journey across the exposed ground was the longest 200 meters of Sarah's life. She moved slowly and deliberately, using her cane not just for support but as part of her deception. To the enemy snipers, she appeared to be a wounded soldier attempting to crawl to safety, dangerous enough to monitor, but not an immediate priority target compared to the healthy soldiers who might pose a real threat. Twice during the crossing, sniper bullets kicked up dirt near her position, but she continued moving with the same irregular, struggling gait that made her appear more wounded than she actually was. When she reached a shell crater halfway across the open ground, she used it for cover while observing the enemy sniper positions. Her intelligence training allowed her to identify 3 separate sniper nests that were covering the route, confirming her suspicion that previous attempts had failed because soldiers had tried to move too quickly and predictably. The final stretch to the eastern bunker required Sarah to cross the most exposed section of ground, where 2 separate sniper teams had overlapping fields of fire. But her analysis of their positioning revealed a narrow window of opportunity. If she timed her movement correctly, she could use a destroyed vehicle as cover for most of the crossing, exposing herself for only a few seconds. When Sarah finally reached the eastern bunker, Master Sergeant Kowalski stared at her in amazement. "How the hell did you make it across?" he asked, helping her into the defensive position. "Carefully," Sarah replied, immediately setting up the jamming equipment. "And Master Sergeant? We need to talk about timing. I need you to coordinate your defensive fire with the jamming sequence or this won't work." For the next 20 minutes, Sarah and Kowalski worked together more closely than either had ever imagined possible. Sarah's intelligence analysis had provided precise timing for the enemy's communication patterns, while Kowalski's combat experience told him exactly when the enemy assault would begin. When Sarah activated the jamming sequence at exactly the right moment, the enemy's coordinated attack dissolved into confusion and chaos. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Enemy units that had been moving in perfect coordination suddenly found themselves isolated and confused. Their carefully planned assault became a series of uncoordinated attacks that the base's defenders could handle effectively. Within an hour, The enemy forces were retreating, leaving behind equipment and wounded that provided valuable intelligence about their organization and capabilities. As the sun rose over Fob Phoenix, Sarah found herself standing beside Kowalski, both of them exhausted but victorious. The Master Sergeant looked at her with an expression she had never seen before, not just respect but genuine admiration. "I owe you an apology, Sergeant," he said quietly. "And I owe every soldier in this base a debt of gratitude for what you did tonight." 3 months after the attack on Fob Phoenix, Sarah found herself in the most unexpected place imaginable, standing before a gathering of senior military officers, government officials, and media representatives in the Pentagon's Hall of Heroes. She was being awarded the Silver Star for her actions during the base attack, making her one of the youngest recipients in recent military history, and the first soldier with a mobility aid to receive such a high honor. The ceremony itself was overwhelming, but what struck Sarah most was the presence of her family in the front row. Her father sat in his dress uniform, tears streaming down his weathered face as he watched his daughter receive recognition for the courage he had always known she possessed. Her mother dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, finally understanding why Sarah had been so determined to serve her country despite everyone's doubts. But the most meaningful moment came after the formal ceremony, when Master Sergeant Kowalski approached her during the reception. The gruff veteran who had once questioned her very presence in the military now stood before her with obvious humility and respect. "Sergeant Martinez," he said, his voice unusually quiet. "I've been in the Army for 22 years and I've served with some of the finest soldiers this country has ever produced." He paused, seeming to struggle with words that didn't come easily to him. "But what you did that night, that wasn't just courage. That was the kind of leadership and sacrifice that makes other soldiers better, just by witnessing it." Sarah felt a lump in her throat as she responded, "Master Sergeant, you taught me something important that night. You showed me that respect isn't something you demand. It's something you earn by proving you're willing to put your fellow soldiers first, no matter what the cost." Kowalski nodded slowly. "I was wrong about you, Martinez. Dead wrong, and I'm not too proud to admit it." He extended his hand, and when Sarah shook it, she felt like she had finally, truly, become a soldier in every sense of the word. The media attention following the ceremony was intense but largely positive. Sarah's story resonated with people across the country. The young woman who had overcome physical challenges and skepticism to become a decorated war hero. Interview requests poured in from news networks, magazines, and documentary filmmakers, all wanting to tell her story. During one particularly memorable television interview, the host asked Sarah about the moment when she had decided to cross the exposed ground to reach Kowalski's position. "Weren't you afraid?" the interviewer pressed. "Didn't you think about the fact that you might not be able to move as quickly as other soldiers if you came under direct fire?" Sarah's response became one of the most quoted statements of her military career. "I learned a long time ago that being different isn't the same as being limited. That night I wasn't thinking about what I couldn't do. I was thinking about what I could do that nobody else could. Sometimes the most unexpected solution is the most effective one, but perhaps the most gratifying response came from an unexpected source." Thompson, her former squad mate from basic training who had initially questioned her capabilities, sent her a letter that arrived just days after the ceremony. In it he wrote, "Sarah, I've been following your career since we finished training, and I wanted you to know that you changed how I think about leadership and strength. You taught me that the best leaders aren't the loudest or the strongest. They're the ones who see solutions that others miss and have the courage to act on them. Congratulations on your medal. You earned it 100 times over." Sarah's military career continued to flourish in the years following her decoration. She was promoted to staff sergeant and later assigned to the Military Intelligence School at Fort Huachuca, where she helped develop new training programs for intelligence analysis and tactical coordination. Her unique perspective and proven track record made her an invaluable instructor for soldiers who would later serve in combat zones around the world. But perhaps her most important contribution came through her work with military personnel who faced their own physical challenges. Sarah became an unofficial mentor and advocate for soldiers dealing with injuries, disabilities, and medical conditions that might have previously ended their military careers. She worked with military medical boards to develop new assessment criteria that looked beyond traditional physical requirements to evaluate soldiers' actual capabilities and potential. Contributions. One of her most successful mentorship cases involved a young Marine named David Rodriguez who had lost his left arm in an IED explosion, but wanted to continue serving. Traditional military thinking would have classified him as unfit for duty, but Sarah worked with him to develop adaptive techniques that allowed him to continue his role as a communications specialist. Rodriguez not only returned to active duty, but eventually received his own decoration for exceptional service during a humanitarian mission. 5 years after her Silver Star ceremony, Sarah was promoted to Sergeant First Class and assigned to the Pentagon's Strategic Planning Division. Her role involved analyzing global security threats and developing response strategies for potential international conflicts. It was challenging, intellectually demanding work that perfectly matched her analytical skills and strategic thinking abilities. During a reunion dinner with her original specialized training group, Rodriguez raised a toast that captured how far they had all come. To Sarah Martinez, who taught us that the strongest soldiers aren't the ones who never face obstacles. They're the ones who face obstacles every day and find ways to turn them into advantages. Sarah's father, now retired but still proud of his daughter's service, often spoke about her accomplishments to other veterans at the local VFW post. But he was most proud of a letter Sarah had received from a young girl in Texas who walked with a cane due to a condition similar to Sarah's own. The girl had written, "Dear Sergeant Martinez, my school counselor says I should think about realistic career goals, but after reading about you, I know that realistic just means thinking differently, not thinking smaller. I want to be a soldier too." That letter, framed and hanging in Sarah's Pentagon office, reminded her daily that her greatest victory wasn't the medal or the promotions or the recognition. It was proving that courage comes in many forms, and that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to accept other people's limitations as your own. As Sarah looked back on her journey from the girl with a cane who was mocked in high school to the decorated soldier helping to protect her country, she realized that every challenge, every doubt, and every person who had underestimated her had contributed to her strength. She had learned that true leadership isn't about being the fastest or the strongest. It's about seeing possibilities where others see obstacles, and having the courage to act on that vision even when everyone else thinks you're crazy. The girl they had once mocked for her cane had become the soldier they now looked to for guidance, strategy, and inspiration. And in proving herself, she had opened doors for countless others who would follow in her footsteps, carrying their own unique strengths into service for their country.